The C-17 Globemaster III touched down hard on the tarmac at Pope Army Airfield just after 19 p.m. local. Colonel Alistair Finch, British Army, 52 years old and carrying the kind of mileage that only 3 Afghanistan rotations and 1 Iraq tour can put on a man, stepped off the ramp with a battered Bergen rucksack slung over one shoulder. His number 8 combat dress, heavy cotton, faded, smelling faintly of cordite and embassy reds, looked like it belonged to another century next to the sea of Crye precision uniforms and plate carriers waiting on the flight line. A young American major, Ryan Caldwell, 34, 2 combat tours already under his belt, greeted him with a handshake that could crush walnuts. "Welcome to Bragg, Colonel. We've got you on the JLTV. Grab a seat." The ride to Fort Liberty took 20 minutes. Caldwell spent the entire time swiping through an iPad Pro, briefing Finch on the 8-day itinerary via a 47-slide PowerPoint deck titled TDY COL A Finch, UK Armed Forces, November 2025. Finch stared at the glowing screen like it was written in Martian. "PowerPoint?" he asked, Belfast accent thick enough to cut with a bayonet. "Roger that, sir," Caldwell grinned. "We fight wars with bullets and briefings, mostly briefings." That was the first warning shot. Day 1 started at Camp McCall's Range 37 complex, a place the Americans simply called the City. Finch had read the brochures, but nothing prepares you for walking into a windowless building the size of 3 soccer fields and finding a perfect replica of downtown Mosul inside it. Or Raqqa, or Caracas. The walls moved on rails, the smells, burning trash, raw sewage, cumin, cordite, were pumped in on cue. Hidden speakers barked Arabic, Pashto, and the occasional Texan yelling, "Let's go, boys." Finch watched a 12-man Delta assault troop roll in wearing the latest Crye G3 combat apparel, Ops Corps fast helmets with NVG-B dual-tube night vision thermal goggles, and comms nodes that looked like something Apple designed for DARPA. They didn't speak to each other. Not once. Every word went through the Net Warrior system straight into bone conduction headsets. Overhead, 4 Black Hornet 3 nanodrones buzzed like angry hornets, feeding 4K video to a command trailer. The scenario: hostage rescue, 3-story building, 18 role players as terrorists, 6 civilians, 2 pressure plate IEDs. Time standard? Under 4 minutes 30 seconds. Finch stood behind the one-way glass with a handful of U.S. observers. He shook his head. 4.5 minutes? In Helmand, we'd spend a full day just getting eyes on a compound like that. Timer started. 000. Drone paints the hostage through concrete with ground-penetrating radar. 0017. 2 sniper teams on adjacent rooftops drop the exterior sentries with suppressed .338 Lapua rifles. 0042. EMP grenade kills the building's CCTV grid. 0118. Breachers hit the front door with a water charge that sounds like a polite cough. 0221. Hostage is out. 0 injuries. 0229. All 18 bad guys down. 0 friendly casualties. 0 rounds fired into drywall that shouldn't have been shot. The control room erupted in applause. Finch didn't clap. He just muttered, "Bloody hell." That afternoon, they showed him the video that had caused the whole transatlantic flap, the one that had gone viral on X, the one that half of NATO called propaganda and the other half called a recruiting ad. GoPro footage from the Delta team leader's helmet, perfectly stabilized, slow-motion muzzle flashes, orchestral version of Fortunate Son underneath. Finch had been 95% sure it was CGI. After today, he was down to maybe 30%. Day 2 was worse. They set up a small force-on-force. 8 British veterans handpicked by Finch, all former paras or Royal Marines, men who'd bled in Basra and Sangin, versus 8 Delta operators. Objective: capture the flag, 6 square kilometers of pine forest and swamp. Classic infantry fight, or so Finch thought. The Brits moved the way they'd moved for 20 years. Tight wedge formation, hand signals, whispered voice comms on Bowman radios. They felt good. "We've been doing this before these lads were born," Finch told Caldwell. The Americans didn't move like a team. They dispersed like smoke, each man 300 to 400 meters apart, yet never out of touch. Every operator carried an ATAC tablet on his chest, showing Blue Force tracker pings accurate to 10 centimeters. A Puma AE drone circled at 5,000 feet. A Gray Eagle loitered at 25,000 feet as a data relay. 23 minutes later, the British team was 100% dead. Not a single real round fired. Every time a Brit raised his head above a fallen log, a Switchblade 300 that had been orbiting overhead for 40 seconds painted him with a laser and declared him KIA. Game over. Finch sat on a stump, green beret in his lap, staring at the mud on his boots. Caldwell offered a bottle of water. "You don't fight," Finch said finally, voice hoarse. "You compute." Caldwell shrugged. "Yes, sir. We compute victory before the first trigger is pulled." That night, in a transient BOQ room that smelled of fresh paint and air conditioning, Alistair Finch poured 3 fingers of Glenfiddich 18 he'd carried in his luggage and watched the helmet cam replay on his laptop. There he was, a full colonel with the Queen's Gallantry Cross, getting killed by a 27-year-old kid from Lubbock flying a drone the size of a pizza box. He raised the glass to the screen. "You've got me, you bastards. You've absolutely got me."
The wake-up call came at 4 a.m. with a gentle chime from the iPad on the nightstand. No bugle, no screaming sergeant, just a soft notification that read, "Physical Optimization March. Report to Range 44, NLT 0430. Finch rolled out of bed feeling like he'd been hit by a Challenger 2. The Glenfiddich had won last night. By 0445, he was standing in formation with 20 American operators, all wearing the new Army Combat Fitness uniform and Suunto watches the size of hockey pucks. A lean civilian in an Under Armour hoodie, Dr. Emily Park, Ph.D. in kinesiology, from Stanford, contracted to the POF program, briefed the event. "This is not a race," she said, voice bright as a dental drill. "This is a data collection rock. 12 kilometers, 35-pound load. Goal is not fastest time. Goal is to stay inside the green zone. Heart rate 125 to 145 BPM, lactate under 4 mmol per liter, ground reaction force symmetry within 5%. Deviate too far and the algorithm docks your unit's readiness score." Finch blinked. "You're telling me we can march too fast?" "Correct, sir," one of the operators said, without irony. "Excessive speed spikes cortisol and compromises recovery. We optimize." They set off into the darkness, headlamps bobbing. Finch, stubborn bastard that he was, tried to walk at what he considered a proper tabbing pace, about 5.5 kph. Within 3 minutes, his watch buzzed angrily and flashed red. A drone the size of a dinner plate swooped down and hovered at eye level. A calm female voice came out of it. "Colonel Finch, you are 18 BPM above sustainable threshold. Reduce cadence by 6 steps per minute or risk a 0.7% degradation in Unit Combat Effectiveness Index." He actually stopped in his tracks. The rest of the formation flowed around him like water around a rock. A staff sergeant, jogging backward, grinned at him. "Don't fight the algo, sir. It knows you better than your own mother." Finch slowed down. The drone peeled off, satisfied. 2 hours later, they finished. Average time, 2 hours, 41 minutes. Finch's personal time, 2 hours, 39 minutes. He'd cheated the last kilometer. The Brits would have called it a decent morning stroll. The Americans called it statistically optimal. Back in the briefing tent, Dr. Park projected a 3D graph showing every man's biometric data in real time. Finch's line was a jagged red mess that looked like the Hindu Kush skyline. Everyone else's was a gentle green wave. She asked, "See the difference? Individual heroics cost the system. The system is what wins wars now." Finch felt something he hadn't felt since he was a second lieutenant: inadequacy. That afternoon, he sat down with Captain Mike Torres, a quiet, dark-eyed officer from 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, who had a master's from MIT before he decided blowing doors was more interesting than PowerPoint in Cambridge. Torres laid it out plain. "Sir, the British Army runs on brotherhood. We respect that. It's beautiful. But Brotherhood scales poorly past about 150 guys, Dunbar's number. After that, you need systems. America doesn't win because we're braver or tougher. We win because if one guy gets hit, the network reroutes in 0.8 seconds, and the mission doesn't even hiccup. No irreplaceable heroes, just nodes. Finch started to argue, something about the paras at Goose Green, but Torres cut him off gently. Respectfully, sir, Goose Green was 1982. Today, the Argentinians would have a wing-long 2 overhead, and you all would be dead before you left the start line. The age of the heroic infantry charge is over. The age of the self-healing network has begun. That evening, Finch wandered the cantonment area alone. He passed a basketball court where a dozen operators were playing shirts and skins. They were laughing, trash-talking, dunking on each other, normal soldiers. But every one of them had an Apple Watch or a Whoop strap blinking data back to some server farm in Virginia. Even their horseplay was quantified. He stopped at the PX, bought a 6-pack of something called Ghost Energy because it was the only thing without sugar, and sat on a bench outside the gym. A young sergeant walked past talking on his phone. "Yeah, babe, my Aura sleep score was 91 last night. Readiness 94. I'm cleared for full intensity tomorrow. Love you." Finch stared into his can. The kid was 24 and talking about his sleep metrics like a Grand National jockey discussing his horse's blood work. He felt suddenly, achingly alone. These men were surrounded by more connectivity than any soldiers in history. Satellite comms, real-time Blue Force tracking, instant medevac request apps, yet they seemed isolated inside their own data bubbles. No one was singing dirty rugby songs. No one was sharing a cigarette and a story about how Jocko stole a tank in Basra. Everything was filtered, logged, optimized. He texted his son Rory, a captain in the Riffles, currently freezing his ass off on Salisbury Plain. "These Yanks have built the most extraordinary war machine I've ever seen, and I'm not sure there's a single human soul left inside it." Rory replied instantly with a single emoji, mind blown. Finch finished the energy drink, crushed the can in his fist, an old habit, and realized the can was aluminum so thin it barely made a sound. Day 3 ended with the taste of artificial sweetener and the growing suspicion that the future didn't need men like him.
Day 4 began with the surrender. Not a dramatic one, no white flag, no tears, just a quiet, internal click. Alistair Finch woke up, shaved with the disposable razor the BOQ provided, and put on the American Army combat shirt they'd issued him the night before. It fit perfectly. The fabric wicked sweat like magic. He hated how much he liked it. At 06:30 a.m., he walked into the team room carrying a Ranger green notebook and a government-issue Sharpie instead of his usual battered British daybook. Captain Torres noticed immediately. "Morning, Colonel. You look assimilated." Finch grunted. "If you can't beat them, dive head first into the bloody machine and see if it spits you out the other side." Torres grinned. "Welcome to the Borg, sir." They started him slow. 4 hours in the Tactical Operations Center, TOC, learning to read the common operational picture on 6 55-inch monitors. The screen was a riot of icons: blue diamonds for friendly, red for enemy, purple for unknown, yellow pulsing circles for artillery danger close radii, green dashed lines for phase lines that updated themselves every 30 seconds. It looked like Bloomberg Terminal designed by Satan. Then came the real baptism, a 36-hour exercise called Iron Talon. Scenario: a near-peer conflict in the Baltic states, 2029. Russia has seized Narva. NATO Article 5 invoked. Finch was attached as liaison officer to a joint special operations task force built around Delta, SEAL Team 6, the 24th Special Tactics Squadron, and a Polish Grom detachment. His job? Integrate British SO thinking into the American kill chain. The first 12 hours were pure humiliation. Every time Finch tried to offer battlefield intuition, the staff looked at him like he'd suggested they navigate by the stars. When he asked for a paper map, a 23-year-old intelligence captain handed him a tablet and said, "Sir, the map is the tablet." At hour 14, the Red Air, simulated Chinese J-20s, conducted a cyber-enabled seed strike. Every screen in the TOC went black except one that read in friendly green letters, "Cyber kill chain successful. All SATCOM degraded. GPS denied environment." Finch felt his stomach drop. This was the moment he'd been waiting for. The great American machine blinded. Now the Yanks would have to fight like men, like paras in the Falklands, like commandos at St. Nazaire. Instead, the TOC simply reconfigured. Screens flickered back to life, running on a mesh network of high-altitude balloons and Starlink terminals that had been pre-positioned in secret. The common operational picture rebuilt itself in 47 seconds using inertial navigation updates from every soldier's personal dead reckoning module. The drone feeds switched seamlessly to line-of-sight relays carried by MQ-9s flying racetracks over the North Sea. The task force commander, a 2-star named McAllister, never even raised his voice. He just said, "We trained for this. Execute Plan Echo 3. Finch stood there, mouth dry, watching a war being run like a software upgrade. At hour 20, they gave him a seat at the targeting table. A high-value individual, HVI, was moving through Tallinn in a 3-car convoy. Window, 8 minutes. The fire support officer asked Finch, "British rules of engagement, Colonel. Can we strike if positive ID is 63% and collateral damage estimate is 1 civilian?" Finch hesitated. In his world, you waited for 95% PID and 0 collaterals or you didn't shoot. The JAG captain leaned over. "Sir, the algorithm says the HVI will detonate a radiological device in 72 hours, killing approximately 40,000. Predicted civilian death from strike, 1 73-year-old female, 0.8 probability." Finch stared at the drone feed, a grainy infrared blob in the back of a Mercedes. He heard his own voice, distant, weapon-free. 38 seconds later, the convoy ceased to exist. Hellfire shot from a Reaper launched out of Šiauliai, Lithuania. The JAG stamped it legal. Finch walked outside the TOC for air and threw up behind a shipping container. Hour 28, the final assault. Objective: seize a radio tower on a hill outside Narva. Defended by a motorized rifle company with T-90s and 2 SS-19 howitzers. Finch was embedded with the assault force this time, riding in the back of a Flyer 72 light strike vehicle. They never closed within 5 kilometers of the objective. Instead, the task force executed what they called Hyperwar convergence. 1. 2 F-35s loitered at 40,000 feet, invisible. 2. A swarm of 180 Predix microdrones saturated the battlefield, jamming every radar. 3 HIMARS batteries 120 km away ripple-fired GM RLS rockets with alternate warheads that turned the hill into an electromagnetic dead zone. 4. A single Delta squad fast-roped from a stealth Blackhawk that had flown nap of the earth under the degraded Russian IADs. 5. The squad placed a 40-pound charge on the tower's base and exfiltrated before the first Russian soldier figured out his rifle wouldn't fire because the electronic fuses were fried. Total duration, 11 minutes, 40 seconds. Friendly casualties, 0. Enemy, battalion minus. Back in the TOC, General McAllister poured Finch a styrofoam cup of terrible coffee. "You held your own today, Colonel. You authorized the strike. You didn't flinch when we went full cyberkinetic. That's not nothing." Finch's voice was raw. "I feel like I just watched the death of soldiering." McAllister shook his head. "No, sir. You watched its evolution. The job isn't to close in and destroy the enemy anymore. The job is to make the enemy irrelevant before he even knows he's in a fight." That night, Finch sat alone in the skiff and wrote in his notebook, "We are not behind. We are not even playing the same sport. They have turned war into an engineering problem, and they are the best engineers the world has ever seen." He underlined the last sentence 3 times. Day 6 ended with a quiet ceremony in a hangar. They gave him a small coin, no ribbon, no certificate, just a piece of titanium with a Delta dagger on one side and the words "IRON TALON 2025" on the other. Torres slapped him on the back.
You're one of us now, whether you like it or not." Finch looked at the coin, then at the hundreds of millions of dollars of hardware parked outside, and then at the exhausted but strangely serene faces of the men and women who ran it all. He said, "I don't know what I am anymore," but he kept the coin.
Day 7 started with the helicopter ride most men never get. At 05 a.m., a blacked-out Sikorsky UH-60M, call sign Nighthawk 06, lifted off from Simmons Army Airfield and turned northeast. No markings except a tiny American flag on the tail. Inside, Finch, Captain Torres, and a one-star named Brigadier General Daniel Reardon, the Director of Operations for JSOC. No aides, no photographers, no PowerPoint. They flew low and fast over the Virginia countryside, then up the Potomac as the sun rose blood-red behind the Lincoln Memorial. Finch watched the monument slide past and felt, for the first time in a week, something like awe that wasn't tied to technology. The bird flared and landed on the Pentagon's river entrance helipad. A Marine captain in dress blues met them with a crisp salute and no words. They walked through corridors Finch had only seen in movies. Polished floors, walls lined with oil portraits of long-dead generals, the faint smell of floor wax and burnt coffee. They went down, not up. 3 escalators, 2 elevators, 1 badge scan that required both retina and a 6-digit code. Finally, a steel door opened into a room the British call a war room and the Americans call the National Military Command Center Annex, Delta. The lights came up slowly, like a theater. It was not one room, it was a cavern. 4 tiers of workstations rose in concentric rings around a central holographic table the size of a tennis court. On the walls, 180-degree curved screens showing every U.S. military asset on Earth in real time. Finch saw a carrier strike group in the South China Sea, a B-2 orbiting over the Arctic, a Special Forces team in Mali, a Reaper feed from Yemen, and, this made his blood run cold, a live satellite shot of a Royal Navy Type 45 destroyer in the North Sea, clear enough to read the whole number. General Reardon spoke quietly. "Welcome to the beating heart, Colonel. This is where the United States actually runs the world." A civilian in a hoodie and flip-flops, Finch later learned he was a Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, age 34, net worth north of $200 million, walked over and shook Finch's hand like they were at a barbecue. "Sir, your liaison code is already in the system. You have observer status for the next 48 hours. Ask anything. We've got nothing to hide from a Five Eyes partner." For the next 12 hours, Finch did not sit down once. He watched a crisis unfold in the Horn of Africa. A Chinese-backed warlord seized a port. Within 41 minutes, the U.S. had retasked 2 satellites, launched a Global Hawk from Sigonella, moved a Marine Expeditionary Unit 400 nautical miles west, and sent a classified démarche to Beijing. The port was back in friendly hands before the sun set in Mogadishu. He watched a cyber strike on an Iranian enrichment facility. No explosion, just a 0.7-second spike in the centrifuges that turned 10,000 of them into expensive scrap metal. The Iranians still didn't know what hit them. He watched a single Delta operator in Syria call in a GBU-53 Stormbreaker from an F-35 that was still over Iraq, drop it through a skylight onto a meeting of ISIS-K leadership, and confirm 7 HVIs dead while drinking a Monster Energy in the back of a Toyota Hilux. At 2200 hours, General Reardon took him to a small side room with no screens, just a wooden table, 4 chairs, and a pot of coffee that tasted like it had been brewed in 1998. Reardon poured 2 cups. "You've seen the machine now, Alistair. Tell me what you really think." Finch's voice was hoarse from 12 hours of almost no talking. "I think you've built God." Reardon laughed, not unkindly. "No, we built a very, very expensive mirror. It shows the world exactly what we decide it should see. That's not divine. That's just money, engineering, and the willingness to admit that war stopped being about courage somewhere around 1991. He leaned forward. "You Brits still think war is about character. That's noble. But character doesn't survive first contact with a hypersonic glide vehicle. Scale does. Logistics does. Bandwidth does. We don't win because we're braver. We win because no one else can spend $800 billion a year and still pretend it's not enough." Finch stared into his coffee. "Why do you do it then? If it's not about defending your homes anymore, what is it?" Reardon didn't hesitate. "Predictability. The world America wants is boring. No surprises. Trade routes open, markets stable, elections that don't get decided by men with AKs.
"We're not fighting for freedom, Colonel. We're fighting for a planet where supply chains don't get interrupted. That's the new patriotism." Finch felt something cold settle in his chest. So the Empire isn't dead, it just stopped pretending to be about anything except itself. Reardon smiled without warmth. Welcome to the 21st century. Day 8 was quieter. They flew him commercial, first class, out of Dulles back to London. In the window seat over Greenland, he opened the classified tablet they had let him keep for the flight home. One file was waiting, a draft report addressed to the British Chief of the General Staff, already half-written in Finch's name. The summary page was only 3 lines. 1. The video is authentic. 2. The capability gap is not generational, it is civilizational. 3. Recommend immediate and sustained exchange program focused not on tactics, but on systems thinking, logistics scale, and data-dominant warfare. There was a digital signature block at the bottom. All it needed was his stylus. He stared at it for a long time. Then, he signed. Below his name, he added one line of his own. "We are no longer defending the realm, we are defending our place inside someone else's." He saved the file, encrypted it, and shut the tablet. Outside the window, the ice caps glittered under a pale sun.
The British Airways 777 touched down at Heathrow just after dawn, gray, wet, and exactly the way Alistair Finch remembered home. He walked through Terminal 5 in civilian clothes, jeans, barber jacket, no rank, no beret, carrying only the same battered Bergen and a thin black Pelican case that hadn't left his side since Washington. Customs waved him through the nothing-to-declare lane without a second glance. No one could have guessed that the case contained a laminated, full-color organizational chart of the Pentagon's Joint Special Operations Command, folded 8 times, edges already worn soft from handling, and a single titanium coin that now lived in his pocket like a guilty secret. He took the train into Paddington, then the tube to King's Cross, then a first Great Western service to Hereford. The whole journey he kept the Pelican case on his lap and stared out at the sodden fields of Wiltshire and Gloucestershire. England looked small after America. Not just geographically, he had always known the numbers, but small in ambition, small in imagination, small in consequence. At Credenhill, he reported directly to the commanding officer of 22 SAS, an old friend named Colonel Jamie Mac Mackenzie. They had served together in Sierra Leone and had once shared a bottle of Black Bush in a ditch outside Basra. Mac poured 2 mugs of tea, strong enough to stand a spoon in, and listened without interrupting while Finch spoke for 93 minutes straight. When Finch finished, the room was quiet except for the tick of the wall clock. Mac finally spoke. "So the video wasn't Hollywood bollocks after all?" "No, Mac. It was the trailer. The full film is worse." Mac rubbed his temples. "And your recommendation?" "Send our best officers, captains, majors, the ones who will be brigadiers in 10 years, over there for 18-month embeds. Not to learn how to kick doors, to learn how to run a war like it's Amazon Prime. 2-day shipping on artillery rounds, real-time customer reviews from the battlefield, predictive analytics on when the enemy is going to run out of morale. We keep our soul, but we graft their nervous system onto it." Mac nodded slowly. "And if the Treasury says we can't afford it?" Finch opened the Pelican case, unfolded the org chart, and laid it across the desk like a battle map. "Then we stop pretending we're still a first-tier power and get comfortable being a very well-mannered regional one." That night, Finch drove to his cottage outside Hay-on-Wye. His son Rory, now a captain with 3 rifles, was waiting on leave, sitting at the kitchen table cleaning a Glock 19 with the methodical care of a man who had grown up watching his father clean SA-80s the same way. Rory looked up. "Well, Dad, are the Yanks really 10 feet tall?" Finch poured 2 whiskeys, no ice, no water, and sat down. "They're not taller, son. They're wider. They fight with spreadsheets the size of football fields and budgets that could buy Scotland twice over. And they've decided courage is a secondary attribute, like upper body strength in a drone pilot." Rory laughed, then saw his father wasn't smiling.
Finch reached into his pocket and set the titanium coin on the table between them. It caught the lamplight and threw it back like a challenge. "I used to tell you that bravery was the willingness to die for something bigger than yourself. I was wrong." He tapped the coin. "Bravery now is the willingness to build something so large and complex that no single act of bravery or cowardice can bring it down. The Americans don't need heroes anymore. They need competent systems administrators who can keep the machine running when half the planet wants it to crash." Rory turned the coin over in his fingers. "So what do we do? We stop romanticizing bayonets and start mastering bandwidth. We keep the regimental system, the banter, the black humor, the ability to fight with a broken rifle and a bad attitude, but we bolt it onto their spine. Otherwise, the next time someone kicks off in the Baltics or the South China Sea, we'll be spectators with very nice uniforms." Finch raised his glass. "To the end of the age of the lion and the beginning of the age of the network." They drank. Years later, long after he'd retired as a brigadier with a quiet CBE and an even quieter reputation as the man who Americanized Hereford, Alistair Finch would be found on Wednesday evenings in the corner of the Green Dragon pub buying pints for young officers and unrolling that same creased org chart on the scarred oak table. He never told war stories anymore. No tales of helmed nights or sanguine mornings. Instead, he taught them how to read a common operational picture, how to write a conop in 12 paragraphs instead of 12 pages, how to think in kill chains instead of killing fields. The young ones called him the Prophet of Fort Liberty. Some of them mocked him behind his back, called him Slide Deck Finch or the Yank Whisperer, but every single one of them kept a folded copy of his Pentagon org chart in their desk drawer, the way monks once kept illuminated manuscripts. On the night he died, quietly, in his sleep, age 78, they found the titanium delta coin sewn inside the lining of his old green beret. No one had ever seen him wear the beret after 2025. He'd kept it in a drawer for 50 years, the coin hidden like a splinter of the future that he'd carried home. At his funeral in Hereford Cathedral, the eulogy was given by a 4-star American general who flew in specially. The general only said 12 words. He saw tomorrow first, and he dragged the rest of us into it. Outside, the rain fell soft and steady on the Wye, the same rain that had fallen on British soldiers for 1,000 years, but for the first time in centuries, the next generation standing in the churchyard weren't quite sure whether they were still defending an island or simply maintaining a very important node in someone else's empire. Alistair Finch had given them the question. They would spend the rest of their careers trying to find an answer that still felt like home.